Hello guys, welcome to the next video on Node.js tutorial for beginners. In this video, we will talk about events module in Node.js and how we can use event-emitter in Node.js. We will also see. So much of the Node.js core API is built around event-driven architecture, which means that because we know that Node.js runs itself in an asynchronous manner, so it's necessary to have some kind of event-driven architecture. Because, for example, if you are reading data from a database, so once your data is read from a database, you need to trigger some event. Otherwise, if your code is blocking and it's not asynchronous, then your server execution will be blocked until the data is fetched from the database, right? So we have event in Node API, which help us to for example, same example, you want to fetch a data from the database, you write a function for this, and as soon as you you are done with reading of the data from the database, the code triggers an event. So your code will run asynchronously and it's not stopping, and as soon as some function is done, an event can be triggered and the execution can be done, or it can be the data can be sent to the client, for example, right? So let's see how we can use events and events emitter in Node.js. So to use events, just write var events is equal to require this keyword events, right? Now in order to create emitter, you need to call a method called event-emitter, right? So you need to create an instance of new event-emitter object. Okay, so just write var event-emitter is equal to new events, and then call an event-emitter on this object, right? So with a capital E, right? So this will create an instance of event emitter. Okay, and using this event emitter, you can create an event or listener for the event, and then you can also emit an event and the listener will listen to that event. So how you can create a listener? You can just write event emitter object, and then there is a method called on. And for example, if you are writing UI, something clicked, for example, some button is clicked, this is like a listener to your button click. So you can here write a keyword, for example, clicked. So this will be the listener, and whenever this keyword called clicked is emitted, then this method, which is a callback function here, will be called, and whatever code inside this callback function will be executed. So this is kind of a listener. So let's say there is this keyword clicked, and we will emit this keyword using event emitter once again. So just use event emitter dot emit, and simply you can just call this keyword, which means that this event is triggered. For example, clicked is triggered, and here you can use any keyword. So for example, if you are fetching data from the database, you can just write query here, or if you want to add some data, you can just write add. The keyword depend upon you. So whatever keyword you want to use here as a first argument, it's a keyword, and whatever keyword you emit, if it's the same as the listener keyword, then this code inside this callback function will be triggered. So let's see how we can use it. So for example, I will just console log something. So just write console dot log, and I will say something is clicked. Okay, so let's try to run our code. Now, if you are using Visual Studio Code, there is a trick to open a terminal inside your Visual Studio Code editor itself. And the way you can do it, you can just press Ctrl Shift P and it will give you this kind of a box. And here just type toggle integrated terminal. And here you can run your code again, and you can see we are already in the same folder in this terminal. So we just need to write node app.js and run it, and you can see something is clicked. So basically what's happening here is whenever you emit this keyword, then this listener will listen for this keyword, and then the method or callback function will be called, and whatever code you will write here will be executed. Okay, so this is the basic functionality of event emitters. Now in here you can also pass some argument with this emit method. So for example, you want to pass some text, so you can just pass, for example, button 1. Okay, and instead of this you can just pass a function, for example button, and then you can just call button here plus, and then instead of something we will call button 1 is clicked. Okay, so this is an argument which will be passed here. You can pass any number of argument you want here, and just pass the same argument here. This value will be passed to this button, right? If it has the second argument, then the second value will be passed to the second argument. So you can pass some argument also like this, and once again when you run the code, it says button 1 is clicked. Okay, so you can also pass arguments here. Now let's take a little bit more advanced example. Now for this example we will need, for example, a utils module, which is also a core module here. So just write util here is equal to require util, and using util it has so many functionality, and the functionality which we are going to use from this util is the inherit function, or inherits method from it. So there is a method in util, so just write util and then call a method called inherit. So, and then it takes two arguments. First is the class which you want to inherit in. So first is the class which is inheriting, right? So we need to create some for example object in order to inherit from EventEmitter. So let's create an object. So we will just create an object called students, and this student have this function which will take the name of the student, and then it will assign this name to the student itself. So just write this dot name, which is the name or the member of the student, and it will be assigned by this name which is passed through this function, right? Now as I said, utils have this method called inherit, and it takes two arguments. First is the class or the object of the class which wants to inherit. So this is like a class which is inheriting, and the second is the object which is the base class, for example. So from the class which you want to inherit, so we want to inherit from this event emitter. Okay, now this is really good thing about event emitter. We don't need this bracket here, and we also don't need this here, right? So now if you know the concept of inheritance, what happens in inheritance is the class which is inheriting have the access to the methods and the members of the class from which it's inheriting. So student have the access to, for example, on method or emit method or whatever method, public method, which are there in this event emitter class, for example, right? So now what we can do here is we can create some student. For example, student 1 can be max is equal to new student, and we can give the name here max. Okay, so this argument is max in this first case, right? Now whenever we call this object, now this object also have the access to a method called on, right, which we have called using this event emitter instance, because students is inheriting this event emitter. Therefore this object of the student also have the access to this method, and you can simply use this method as we have done earlier. So this student, for example, we can just give the keyword scored, and then we can just pass the anonymous function or callback here, and we can just pass something like marks here, right? And we can console log it. So just write console log, and then we can console log, for example, first of all the name of the object, for example max dot name, and then we can just write here scores and the marks he scores. So the marks are here. Okay, we can print this, and then we can emit this event, right? In real life situation you can do this emit on for example receiving some data from the database, or connecting to a client whenever connection is successful, something like this. But here, for example, I can just write max dot emit, and then this keyword called scored, and the second will be, if you remember, the argument here can be the value of argument, this argument can be passed from here, right? So we can just say 95 marks. Okay, and let's run our code again. Just save the program and run the code again, and here it says max scores 95, right? And we can just write something like marks also here, so we know that he scores this much amount of marks. And once again run the code, and now it says max scores 95 marks, right? Now in the same way you can create a second event, something like this. So instead of max, we can just say the second student is Tom, right? And the name you pass here also, and instead of max you just essentially replace max by Tom. This is our second student, right? And this time Tom scores, for example, 60 marks. Okay, so once again when you run the code, you can just see Mark scores 95 marks and Tom scores 60 marks. Okay, so in this way you can use events and event emitters in Node.js. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please rate, comment, subscribe, and bye for now.